I'm also pleased that you're here. I was talking to my wife, Joanne, and Tanya the other day, and I had the opportunity to meet with a small company and to meet with their managers. It's actually a really good friend of mine. And so I met with them. And I said, after the meeting, I said, I love all my life. I love making a difference in people's lives. I don't care if I'm getting paid or not. It's thrilling for me to share the gray-haired wisdom that I've accumulated over the years with people to make a difference. And I'm anxious to do that for you today. And as you know, I think many of you know me, you know that the wisdom does not come from brilliance. It comes from bumping into brick walls. And when I bump into brick walls, I learn how not to bump into that same brick wall again. And then I share that with people. Here's some basic truths about listening and about communication in general. People respect good listeners. People respect good listeners. Now, let me amplify that. We have a communication process. And by implication, most people default to communicating to have a good communication process. But in reality, listening skills are much more powerful and much more helpful than the talking skills. After all, when you give somebody a compliment, most of the time you're going, he or she's a good listener. And that's a compliment. We don't typically say he or she's a good talker. I mean, we do sometimes, but when somebody listens to us, that means the world. When you listen to somebody else, that means the world to them. One of our latest clients is a $440 million company, a dialysis company that has like 2,800, 2,900 employees. And I was charged with building the president's team into a high-performing team and helping put our 8 steps of the Truby management system embedded into their business. So I would meet with these people. And it was wonderful and weird at the same time. We had, 8 people. There was a CEO, COO, chief HR person, chief medical officer, chief business development officer, chief information technology officer. There was everybody there. And they were good people. Quite frankly, half of them are nationally renowned at least. Half of them were sought after for knowledge and interaction, et cetera. And I would watch them talk. And in general, they were able to communicate and listen to each other. But when something came up that was important, they lost it. Everybody's passion caused them to talk and not listen. If something came up, the finance person, the business development person, the human resources person, the technology person, all of these people had their agendas, and they all of a sudden lost their ability to receive. So if you're going to be a good team player, you've got to be able to listen. The person that got the most compliments regarding communication was a CEO, and everybody said, he's such a good listener. He understands me. So basic truth number 1 is that not only is listening a super important part of the communication process, it's something that will cause people to respect you even more. However, listeners you must be other-centered. Come back. You've got to be other-centered. The definition of listening by implication, if not absolute clarity, is that it's an act of receiving. Listening is an act of receiving. But if you have your perspective, your agenda, and your words that you're trying to put on what the other person is saying, then your listening act is meaningless at best and actually harmful at worst when it comes to listening. Good listeners need patience, silence. I read a book one time on leadership silence. Silence can be one of the most powerful tools that you can use when you're dealing with someone. I've seen it happen over and over. I've trained leaders and managers to how to use silence. Imagine someone coming into your office and they say something to you that is just ludicrous, or they literally should know the answer themselves, and you do this. They say, do you think I ought to get a head start on that report? And you go, what are they going to do? The silence is going to cause them to say something, and then you just nod and they go about their business. Patience, silence, a willingness to receive. That's sort of a duh. But psychologically, we are so much more tuned to what we're wanting to say and what we want them to hear that we lose the ability to receive and the willingness to receive. And we've got to have the absolute keen ability to avoid assumptions. And I'm going to show you more about that in a bit. And a keen eye and ear to observe and receive. Do you notice what's happening here? Listening is not just a passive thing, it's an active thing. You're actively engaged in the process, but you're engaged in a way that is not in a communicating way, but in a listening way. And then, clear that line, best listeners also listen to the subconscious. That is very important, and the importance of it is going to come to play even more as we go through this, because most of the message is going to be driven, if not all of it, from the subconscious. So these are the three basic truths, and let's see if I can. There we go. They're centered. Listening to the subconscious comes from the ability to decipher the subconscious of the other person's perspective, their agenda, and to listen to what's not being said. So if you are one of our members, and we have trainings that are exclusive, and Zoominars that are exclusive to members. That's our plan, is to even be more consistent with that. We open this one up to non-members, and I know there's a number of you that are non-members until this afternoon, because clearly you're going to want to become a member by, 3 o'clock, let's say 4, something like that. I get so excited about helping people, and the membership allows us to help people without me being there. So become a member. Now, I don't know if you heard that, but this is about listening. So you could practice that at this moment. Anyway, our members have had a ton of training regarding this communication, and learned that there's 3 parts to a message that's driven by a language, powered by beliefs in the subconscious. Notice what I've done here. I've kind of picked apart and looked at the elements of the communication process. Typically, what we do in our training is that we'll give the sort of the broad brush, and then we drill down until you get bedrock, and you learn how to shift your mind and shift some basic bedrock principles, and then it applies to everything else, and you're able to open the door easily because you learn that it's a pull door instead of a push door. So the basic communication training is these components to it. There's 3 parts to a message, driven by a language, powered by beliefs in the subconscious. Now, if you haven't had this training before, this might surprise you. The 3 parts to a message are words, tone, and nonverbal. Okay. You kind of can get that intuitively. There's a bunch of study about it. But the message, not just the word, not just the communication, the message is made up of all 3. And only 7% is made up of the words. Only 7. 38% is the tone of voice, and 55% is nonverbal. Now, we said good listeners with advanced listening skills need to listen to what's not being said. Look at the nonverbal. You're not hearing anything. You've got to learn to listen to the nonverbal by knowing what to look for. So you're literally listening with your eyes. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But let me just take this just a little bit further. If Joanne said to me the same 3 words, I love you, change the tone in the nonverbal, it would deliver completely different messages. If she said, I love you, that's nice. She goes, I love you. Same 3 words, totally different message. I love you. Yeah. Different ways that you position it give whole different messages. You can prove this if you have a dog. If your dog walks into the house and you just get gruff with your tone and your hand goes up and you go, nice dog. What's the dog going to hear? It's not going to hear the words nice dog. It's going to hear the message bad dog. And you might have that dog sitting on your lap, scratching behind its ears going, you cute little good for nothing. You ought to run out in the freeway and get run over. And that dog is listening to you, thinking you're saying something nice, and you're not. So there's three parts to a message, and the way you position those is going to deliver the message differently. But let's turn it around to what we're talking about today. The way you listen to these is going to affect the message that you hear. You've got to be able to listen to all three, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, I said there's three parts to a message driven by a language. What's the language that I'm talking about? Now, obviously, you can see the clarity of this principle if you're talking about a Japanese talking to a Frenchman, or a German talking to a Korean. The different languages not only make it difficult to talk, it also makes it difficult to listen. Hear that point. If you're talking to a French person and you speak English and you don't know how to listen in French, you don't know how to speak in French, both elements create a problem. So there is a language when it comes to communication that even two people who speak German or two people who speak English will experience. And it's these different pieces create different languages. There's a training, and if you do have access to membership and you haven't watched this one yet, be sure and watch the communication and personality type training. It shows you the dramatic differences in the what I call languages of the different personality types. In brief, there is the sanguine, the people person. There's the cleric, bottom line, do it now, get the goal done. There's the melancholy, deep and meaningful and purpose-driven. And then there's the phlegmatic, just kind of there, methodical, consistent, plodder. And you'll learn so much more about those. But those are different languages. So the language of the sanguine is about everything there is to know about everything that you're talking about. And you tell stories, you're about people, whereas the cleric is get it done. I had a manager of a department in a large hardware building supply store last week tell me, because they just became members and their team were going through these trainings, and he watched this one, learn the different languages. He is a sanguine. He'll go, hey, how you doing? I wanted to tell you about my weekend, how it went, talk about this, talk about that, talk about everything. And his boss was a cleric. What's the bottom line? Get it done. He learned the difference, and he learned to listen to the core content of his boss without putting meaning on it. In other words, if he heard his boss just give a bottom line, do this, he'd go, boy, he must not care. What doesn't like me? He's putting meaning onto a language. All it was a language. So when you have these different languages that's driving the three parts to the message, it can create difficulties unless you're aware of it. That's the key. You simply become aware and learn how to not only communicate, talk, but listen in the other person's language. We have to be other-centered. And then there's this dominant sensory modes. This now spills over into the advanced part. In our basic training, we don't have this piece and the next piece, but we have it in our legacy learning, a legacy training. We've got about a two-hour deal on communication that goes in depth on these pieces here. This one, I'll tell you right up front, very few people, even when they learn it, use it because it takes concentration, but it is so beautiful and meaningful. Let me give you a flyby. My purpose today is to make you aware, not necessarily to make you an intricate user of it. Sensory modes. We have 5. Most of us do: taste, touch, hearing, sight, and smell. But there are 3 dominant sensory modes. There's our visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Those 3 are our dominant sensory modes. Now, when we have these dominant sensory modes, it affects our body, our mind, and our delivery of and reception of information. It's how our mind processes information. It's tied to our left and right brain, but it is more having to do with how we view the world and how we interact with the world. Let me give you an example. A visually dominant person, well, let me back up and say this first. You will process and remember and engage with the world with your visual, auditory, and kinesthetic far more than you will your taste and your smell. Today's training, you'll remember it more on the auditory aspect of it, the visual aspect of it, and maybe how it felt to you rather more than how it smelled or tasted. And I'm kind of glad for that. Excuse me. So a visually dominant person, which is about 50-ish% of people in the world, speaks with their hands higher, their voice higher. The words they use are see and picture this. And I want you to see the importance of this task that you're going to do. Its perspective has massive impact. A kinesthetic person, which is about 35 to 40% of people in the world, speaks lower with more feeling, more air in their voice, and their hands are lower, and they get a feel for what's going on. Can you grasp what I'm talking about? Can you get a sense of the gravity of this information? So that's a kind of a bizarre example, but it's still true. And if you've got somebody talking in the visual format and somebody talking in the kinesthetic format, they typically do this. I'm going to show you an example of your own mind right now and how it affects you. I'm going to deliver a visual message in a kinesthetic style and a kinesthetic message in a visual style. And watch what happens inside of you. See the yellow bird. I love you. I really feel good about you. Switch it. See the yellow bird. I feel good about you. I love you. You see the congruence there? Up and down means yes, back and forth no, for those of you that do have your cameras on. There is a difference in how you receive and how you deliver. So all my point is so far is that messages are being driven by a language, and that language can fall into the category of personality types. It can fall into the category of our dominant sensory mode, and also the right and left brain processing. In simple terms, people who process more with their right brain see the whole picture. They're all over the place. They'll try to paint you a picture of what to do in segments, in jigsaw puzzle form and style, whereas a left brain person is logical, sequential, etc. When I used to do this and trained in large companies, we would do some stuff to figure out who might be more left brain, who might be more right brain. And then I would choose two volunteers, just choose two volunteers. Somebody who was strongly right brain, somebody who was strongly left brain, and I'd ask them to leave the room. And then I would predict to the rest of the crowd that was there, I would say, I'm going to ask them both this question. Describe for me the process of planting and growing a garden. And I would predict how they would answer the question. And 90% of the time, it was just spot on. So I would tell them that the right brain person would not start in a sequential way. They would be able to see the entire garden immediately. In fact, I could stop them within seconds and say, how tall is this garden? And they'd tell me, what's the dominant color? And they'd tell me, how big is it? They'd tell me. And how they would describe it would not be something you could follow. It would be trying to paint this picture by grabbing jigsaw puzzle pieces and showing them to you. Whereas I predict that the left brain person would go first, second, third, etc., and have to build the planting of the garden. And it didn't matter what the subject matter was. I even used describe for us the process of cutting and eating a watermelon. It didn't matter what it was. So then I'd bring people in. And the left brain person, how would you describe for us the process of planting and growing a garden? They'd go, well, first you must find a plot, and then you decide how big it is. I'd say, how tall are the plants? I don't know. I haven't built it yet. And then you would do, and then you would do, and they would do step, 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 step. And then the right brain person, describe for us the process of planting and growing a garden. And they would just blob, there'd be just verbal vomit. Well, you just all over the place. I'd stop them. How tall is it? They'd tell me. What's the dominant color? They'd tell me. And one person was so right-brained, they weren't even able to talk it. They had to show you. Here's what they did. Here's exactly what they did. They go, well, you planted and it grows. Notice what they were doing? The size, the rows, the planting, the watering. They didn't even say the words. So what do we have so far? Communication has 3 parts to it, driven by a language. And notice the cumbersomeness, the complexity of the massive amount of differences that other person can be speaking to you from. I'm going to show you how to sift through all of this, but you must be aware of what you're sifting through. Now, okay. Now we've got the powered by the subconscious mind. Here we go. Now we're going to dive in to the stuff that shapes the message that you're listening to, that is so deep and broad and complex. Again, I'll show you how to deal with that. But notice what's happening here. 3 parts to a message, driven by multiple aspects of a language, powered by the subconscious mind. So something comes up at work, something comes up at a meeting, and something is said. We're going to change this. We're going to do that. The mind perceives what was just said. And this actually applies to any sensory perception. You can feel something, you can taste water, you can hear something, you perceive it with one of your senses or more of your senses. Now, you never receive something in a vacuum. When you receive something, when you perceive it, you always associate it with something else. Now, what do you suppose you associate it with? Something in your past. If you bite a piece of apple pie, it may be good, it may be not so good, but how many times do you say, wow, this is as good as, or I like this one better than, or this is not as good as, and you're looking at another piece of pie. So we perceive, and then we associate what we're perceiving with something in our past that fits the same category, and we evaluate. Now catch this. We evaluate what we have just seen, tasted, touched, or heard. We evaluate it based upon the association, not based upon the perception of the present tense, it, whatever it is. So we're evaluating this based upon people, issues, the same thing in our past. And then we decide how we're going to communicate about it based upon that. So then we're on the other side of this communication process. We're listening to somebody who says an opinion, who gives a fact, who gives some information about whatever we're talking about, and we're not aware of the fact that that fact is not current and present tense. It's coming from the evaluation that they've just made and how they've associated themselves with that issue from something long ago. I grew up on a cattle ranch. My first, 3 years of schooling was in a one-room schoolhouse. 8 grades, 7 kids. I was the best in the 2nd grade. And yes, I was the only person in the 2nd grade. And there were 2 sisters that were older, in an older grade in this classroom, and they were mean. They actually hurt me. I was afraid of them. And they both had red hair. Well, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? As I grow up and start walking through life, I perceive somebody with red hair. I associated that present tense person with those 2 girls in Coffee Creek School. I evaluated this person based upon the meanness of those person. My decision was get away from me. Now, this dawned on me one day when I was asked to come to San Francisco to a high-rise large corporate company and meet with the CEO for the possibility of doing some training. The woman walked out of her office to greet me. She put her hand out. I grabbed her hand to shake it and looked up. She had red hair. I was doomed to start with, but then it hit me. You know what? Not all women with red hair are probably like those two girls 30 years ago in Coffee Creek School. It was like a light bulb went off, another duh, it should have been. But this is how we do everything. And unless we short circuit that process, the subconscious mind is going to do that. And that's the kind of stuff we're listening to, but it gets even worse. There is a science called neurolinguistic programming that has proven that our default in perceiving, associating, evaluating, deciding about something spills over into speaking about it. And when we speak about it, we generalize, delete, and distort. You ever had anybody say, nobody likes that decision that you just made? Nobody? That's generalizing. Everybody wants to get off work early this Friday. Or our little kids, Mommy, everybody's doing it. Everybody. We tend to generalize. And based upon our perception, association, evaluation, and decision, we will delete aspects of what we're engaged about. I was deleting the fact that a woman with red hair just might be an okay person. I was deleting that because of my narrow-mindedness from my history. And then we distort things as well. If you have the agenda of wanting to be right, if you have an insecurity, if you have a bias, you will distort things to make other people believe what you want to believe. So do you see what's happened here? The perspective of an individual that's talking to you is going to be just deeply embedded with tons of assumptions that come from their past. It's going to be filtered through a language to give you some words. What I'm saying is basically, you're not going to be able to do this, so we might as well just quit. No, I'm going to give you some simple tools. But this is what you're up against. But here's something that's even more important for you to understand. Communication and listening is powered by our subconscious mind. I think that's proven. But your listening is polluted with all these filters too. Yep. So you're going to want to listen to all this crap, but you got a bunch of crap in your mind that's preventing you from being able to do it. And then your emotions get employed. Oh, I tell you, your emotions. So what can happen is that you perceive, evaluate, associate, and decide that this is not good. And so you start talking about it. And then you get emotional about it. That president's team that I talked about earlier, they would get, when they were passionate about something, they'd get emotional. And when you get emotional about something, you actually get more narrow-minded and more filtered. So it makes for an amazing, cumbersome, complex situation to wade through in order to have clear communication and to be able to listen to communication clearly. But I've got a beautiful however for you. Just like I said earlier, our business success model, our management system, everything is built on super simple, common sense things that if you shift a little bit at the base bedrock, it changes everything else. So let's talk about how that works. In our basic training, not the advanced stuff, we taught you to discern and connect and then begin the listening process before you speak. Now, what does that mean? Discern means to discern where this other person's coming from. When you take the training on communication types, personality types, I should say, it's very easy, and you can very quickly determine what language the person is using. So then you connect by, using their language. So if you go to Europe, you don't go, hey, I'm here, speak English. You figure out what country you're in and talk that language. So you discern that you're in France, and then you connect by thinking like, interacting like, speaking like, listening in the French language. And then you're able to listen, and I'll show you, more how to listen. And then, and only then, can you engage and speak. So the solution to the listening problems is to, first of all, understand how to use languages. That's the first thing. And you must not only speak in the other person's language, you must listen in that language too. If any of you speak other languages, I don't. I took a couple years of French, and I took actually a couple years of Greek as well. So I learned enough to know about languages, but I can't speak it clearly. I do know, though, that how words are used means something different than how I would use the same word. I found this true in Australia. I did some training in Australia, and they have certain words that they use that are English words, but they mean something totally different there. And it's important to know that. I won't go into it, but I think I see the smiles on some of you. You know what I'm talking about. So it's important to listen to the words from the language that you're listening to in order to understand some of the meaning. So you've got to understand how to use the different languages. And you also learn to listen and watch for subconscious heightened awareness clues. Now, this is probably the first tool. All the rest of the stuff that I've just given you is designed to give you an intense awareness of what you're up against, not to discourage you, but to understand. Because if you don't go onto the communication field understanding everything that you're up against, then you'll get knocked down. You'll get confused. So you know what you're up against. Now you know that the primary things people are using languages, so you go there first. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one, because in our trainings and the membership that you have or are going to get this afternoon, in the training of the membership, you will get an intense amount of that, because that one's probably the easiest to teach and the easiest to use. This is advanced listening skills. So we're going beyond that today. And so we're going to learn how to listen and watch for the subconscious heightened awareness clues. Remember, there were 3 parts to a message. What were they? Words, tone, nonverbal, right? And where's most of the message? Nonverbal, 55%. So what's a heightened awareness clue? Heightened awareness clue is something that happens in the nonverbal or the tone that gives you a clue that what the person said was important. Now, follow this trail. If John or Jane Doe is talking and something is important to them, it's going to be in their subconscious. And if it's really important, it's going to affect their subconscious. And when that happens, it affects the body. What affects the mind affects the body. Always, always. So if you're talking about something that is important to you, it's going to affect your body in some way. Now, how do you deal with that? First, let's look at the words. A heightened awareness clue are the type of words or the choice of words that a person will use. This is so magical and it goes by so quickly that we often will lose it. So we've already said that a person is going to speak on something that they hear or perceive from, remember, they're going to speak from something that they have perceived, evaluated, or associated with, and then evaluated, and then they're going to speak about that, right? So you say, I just went on a vacation. And somebody goes, wow, how much did that cost? Or somebody says, wow, did your office bother you at all while you were on vacation? Or somebody said, did you finally get to get some rest? Those are simple little statements, aren't they? But where did they come from? They came from the other person's choice of subject matter. Do you catch that? So a John or Jane Doe could say anything about the vacation that you just went on, anything at all. When they plucked out of their repertoire of subject matter, how much did that cost? That was important to them. They could have said anything, but they chose those words. That was important to them. Every response is about the person. Every response, including the words they use, are about the person, from the person. You can hand a snake to 100 people in a row, and the snake stays exactly the same, and you can have 100 different responses because the response is about the person. So when you hear somebody responding to you or responding to somebody about something, the words they choose give you an indication of what's important to them. Then there's the nonverbal heightened awareness clues. I'm going to treat this quickly. What affects the mind affects the body. Not everything that a person is going to talk about is going to be that important, but if it is, you're going to see something change in the nonverbal. What kinds of things change? You ever seen the color of a face change? You ever seen a cheek blush or a neck blotch in color? Or the lips get thin? Or maybe somebody start breathing differently, or their body shifts? What's happening? What was just said was important to the individual, so much so that it fired off a heightened awareness clue in their body. And it's subconscious. Nobody says, that was important to me. I think I'll flush my cheeks. It's not a conscious decision. So when you're listening at this level, you are finding the things that are important to that individual by just watching changes in the body. And the nonverbal, same thing. My brother and I, a long time ago, we were planning something, and I said to him, "Hey, Tim, so if I do that, you want to do this?" He goes, "Sure." Now, that was a change. Any change in the body is a heightened awareness clue from the nonverbal. Any change in the tone is a heightened awareness clue about the tone, about the verbal part. So his word "sure" was a little tighter, a little pinched, a little higher pitched. Well, later I thought I better check it out. So I said, "Hey, Tim, when I said I was going to do that and asked you if it was okay with you, you said, 'Sure.' Is it really? Tell me more." And he goes, "Well, it's not really." So I was able to take and sift through the fruit salad of stuff and pull out that one little piece of wilted lettuce. And it made all the difference in the world. Now, how was I able to do that? Because I watched for the heightened awareness clue. I was listening to the subconscious. So the solution to listening problems is understanding how to use languages and learning to listen and watch for subconscious heightened awareness clues. Now, what do you do when you find one? You clarify, clarify, clarify. Your temptation will be to assume because you perceive, associate, evaluate, and decide. So if I say, "Man, I like horses," you have a perception about horses. You have an association with something that you experienced with horses in the past. You evaluate the concept of horses based upon your experience, and then you say something to me about horses, and then I get to hear what you're saying, so I know what's important to you. But how do you clarify to find out what I mean about horses? First, this is a super powerful point. Ask open-ended questions. You don't ask closed-ended questions like, "Oh, you really like horses?" That's just a repeating of what I said. Or any answer to a question that has a yes or no is a closed-ended question. The best way to ask an open-ended question is simply to say, "Tell me more. Tell me more about why you like horses. Tell me more about horses." Always tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And use the magic word specifically. So somebody goes, "Everybody is upset with that decision you made." Everybody? Tell me who specifically is upset. And they'll give you 3 names, or they'll give you a department. The word specifically is powerful. Why? Because it causes the mind to think of something specifically. If I say, "How did you like this training today?" you can go all over the place. If I say, "What specifically changed you, affected you, or did you like?" the word specifically triggers a different place in the person's mind. So when you see a heightened awareness clue, you say, "Tell me more about the subject, not about the flushing of the cheeks. Tell me more about your cheeks that flushed." No, capture the content that surrounded the cheeks that flushed and say, "Tell me more about that." And then when you ask questions, use what instead of why. Why you actually will trigger a different place in a person's mind when you use the word why compared to when you use the word what or how is it that. I see Valerie there. Let's say Val, you and I share a car, and we're working for the same agency, and you needed the car, and or I needed the car, and you used it in the morning. You're supposed to be back by 1. I need the car, and you get drive in at 2:00. And I say to Valerie, put yourself in Valerie's shoes. I say, Val, why didn't you get here on time? That causes a parent-child rationalizing defensive answer about the person. Well, I tried my best. Besides, you're never on time. Why can get you sort of firing at each other? Yes, I am, and blah, blah, blah. You can go back and forth, you start firing at each other. If I change the words to these, Val, what prevented you from being here on time? That causes her to give a reason. And if you're going to be a good leader, if you're going to be a good listener, if you're going to be a good friend, you want to focus on issues, not junk. You don't want to be blaming. You don't want to be rationalizing, defending. And I see this happen so many times in companies where a boss will say to their employee, why didn't you do that? And the person will go, well, you didn't give me what I needed to do it. You didn't tell me. Yes, I did. You never listen. I always listen. You never are considered about us and what we need to do in our work. You call meetings when I have family time. I'm interested in family just as much as you are, but we got work to see what's going on. You lose the issue completely. So clarify means to ask the person to tell you more when you see these heightened awareness clues. If you want to dive down even more, go, what specifically is the issue? What specifically is important? Or what specifically do you need to get this job done? And if you want to inquire about things, use the word what rather than why, and you'll trigger the right place in the people's mind. So good listening comes from a willingness to hear. Good listening doesn't just happen. You will not walk away from this time together and all of a sudden be a good listener. You've got to have a willingness. And it isn't even necessarily a training as much as a reminding. Take your watch, put it on the opposite hand, put a rock in your pocket, do something that simply reminds you. When you look at your watch on the opposite hand, remember that that's indicating that's reminding you to be a good listener. Tie that concept to shifting the watch. Tie that concept to the rock. Tie that concept to something you put on your desk. So you just need to be reminded. So you got to be willing, to listen to what other people want to say, but then you've got to be other-centered and get out of your own skin and do number 2, shelf yourself to avoid assumptions. As you practice these listening skills, you've got to be other-centered. And you will undoubtedly have power coming through your mind as to what this person should be saying, what you think this person is saying, and it may not be right at all. I was talking to a project manager in a very large engineering firm in the Northwest. And this project manager was a part of a company who served a large railroad company that won't name at the moment. And that railroad company refused to continue work. They stopped the contract at the end of the contract time. It shocked the engineering firm. Not only did it shock the engineering firm, it took a major bite out of their revenue stream because it was one of their biggest clients. So one of the project managers came to a more advanced training that I did on this particular subject. And the whole company, the engineering firm, was going, well, they were making all these assumptions about what they were doing. They were judging, they were complaining. This project manager said, I think I'm going to go listen. So he went and talked to the head guy of this railroad company. And he said, tell me, what evoked your decision to eliminate our contract or to stop our contract? He didn't ask why. Why did you quit? He said, what? And then he listened. He was silent and he listened. He took notes and he watched for heightened awareness clues. And the head of the railroad project company was giving all kinds of data and financials and project stuff. But every time he talked about the relationship, there was a change in the body. The project manager saw that heightened awareness clue, and he said, tell me more about how our relationship is with you and you with us. And the guy physically relaxed and began to spew forth information about the bottom line is we weren't important to you. We'd call you, we wouldn't get a return for 24, 36, sometimes 4 days. Our relationship was not two-way. It was one way. We kept pursuing you when we were your client. And based upon a heightened awareness clue, this project manager was able to get some footing for the relationship again, do a small job, and then they got the whole railroad back again. So you've got to shelf yourself. This company was absolutely thinking from their perspective what was going on. They had to shelf that and then go and be other-centered and listen to the nonverbal, to listen to what was not being said and drill down to get it. And that made all the difference in the world. And at the core, the bottom line of listening is to clarify, 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 using the power of the question. Using the power of the question. Now, it's not just any question. You can't start interrogating somebody. You can't start just throwing questions. What about this? What about that? You've got to ask and then be silent and listen and be genuine in your willingness to want to hear. And I'm going to end with that particular point and then ask you if you have any questions that you have in the chat room or whatever. And that is the concept of genuineness. If you are not genuine, people know that, don't they? Animals know it when you're not genuine. When you're genuine, then you can engage better and people can engage better with you. So all of this stuff boils down to a simple process. Know beyond the shadow of a doubt that when you're talking to somebody, what they're saying is just the tip of the iceberg compared to what's really going on inside. And your job is to listen to, watch for the clues from the subconscious, just like I taught you. You ask the questions with that genuine facial whole being's expression to want to understand, and you'll get the information. And the beauty of that is when you get the information, then you can enhance the relationship. If you're a business, you can enhance the delivery. If you're a leader, you can enhance the connection with the team. If you're going that deep to connect. So there you go, folks. That's how you listen to what's not being said.